extremely excited to have you join us today for what we're calling our Agile HR Learning Series, and kicking off with a fabulous duo from a team that I've known for a number of years and watched their journey, and it's very exciting to have them join us today and hear all about the Agile HR adventures at Kantar. And I think this is a great story because it demonstrates that you can do Agile in all different organizations, and also in organizations that might not have an Agile mindset to begin with, or particularly in parts of the organization. Because I get that question a lot. How do I start Agile when teams around me or maybe my wider organization isn't fully Agile yet? So we can explore that because I think that's a really important question for HR teams and people working in culture and organizational change. So today, our lovely speakers is Chloe and Avril, and I'm going to hand straight over to them so we can hear more, and then I'll introduce myself. So Chloe, would you like to go first?
Hi, everybody. It's really lovely to meet you. So excited to be here and to meet all of you from around the world in your different lockdown scenarios. So really briefly, my background is that I've been in HR all of my life. It feels certainly all of my working life. Various roles, a lot of HR generalist roles, but I always had a learning element to my role because learning and development was really my true love. And about 4 years ago at Kantar, I was previously an HR business partner role. And about 4 years ago, we set up a centre of expertise for learning. And I was lucky enough to join that team. And about a year later, Avril joined the team, and she brought with her Agile. So Avril was my introduction to Agile. And shortly after that, I met Natal. And it's a bit dramatic to say that it changed my life, but it certainly made a massive difference to the way that I worked myself and the way that I worked with the business. So I'm really excited to be sharing that story with you.
Excellent. And I think it can influence your life, not just your business, can't it, Chloe? So we can talk a bit more about that. Thank you so much. And Avril, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, and good morning, everyone. I'm Avril, obviously a colleague of Chloe's. And lovely to meet you all. I'm really excited to share our story. So my background is I spent the first 10 years of my life in healthcare, and that was a variety of roles: nursing, podiatry, and then eventually I worked in pharmaceutical sales. So I was a sales manager and sales leader. I joined the world of HR 20 years ago, and I've predominantly worked in organizational learning and development, and also I've spent about 5 years as HR director, so having done both. And I joined Kantar 4 years ago, and that's when my Agile journey started. So looking forward to talking to you all today about the journey that we've been on.
Fabulous. And I'm Natal Dank. I head up the coaching and community at PXO Culture. And PXO Culture is all about building fantastic people experience and operations, of course, underpinned by Agile mindset and ways of working. And that's what we're going to explore today. How do you build a holistic approach to your employee experience full of moments that matter? I also co-wrote a book recently called Agile HR, which if you haven't got it, you can go on to the PXO Culture website and get a copy with 20% off. And I want to do a shout out for later in the month. We run something that's called a massive morning meetup, and we're going digital, of course, this time, like everyone. And I am going to be joined by Tracy Waters, the people director of People Experience at Sky. And Tracy, I still think, is one of the best case studies around how you build an Agile HR team and really evolve methods over a period of time. And in particular, she really looks at how do you build a great people experience. And so we're going to build a Agile HR experiment. So you're going to actually workshop your own problem and be ready to go back in the workplace after the session. So please join us for that. It's going to be quite a special event. And then we also do have one of the main programs coming up at PXO Culture that's open for public bookings is human-centric design. And this flows again into this topic. And it's very much knowing how to take a problem through to prototyping and testing, and then how do you start to build products and services in the HR, culture, and organizational change area for you to actually build out people experience. So it's a really practical, very hands-on program, and that's kicking off in February if you'd like to join us. So jump on PXO Culture to learn more. All right. We thought we would start with a quick Zoom poll to find out a bit more about who's online and what stage you're at, really, in your own adventures. And then we can start to build on that. The way that the session will run is Avril and Chloe are going to talk through their main story. And from that point onwards, I would love to get questions from you. So if you've got a question that you'd like us to discuss today, pop it into chat and I will pick that up. And what we'll do is we'll then move into a open discussion. Well, I'll start asking questions to Avril and Chloe, but of course, starting to bring in your questions with the idea that we aim to get your questions covered through the session. So please let us know what you want to focus on today. Okay, so to kick off, let's find out about you a bit more. So first poll is, have you started your own Agile adventure? And your options are yes, in full swing, yes, just started, not yet, or no plans to start. And then, of course, we'd love to know what role or function you're working in. So is it HR? Is it learning and development, people and culture, perhaps change, perhaps agile coaching, perhaps consulting, or another part of the business? You can, of course, pick several or all of them. Up to you how you'd like to express that. So we've got quite a few people that have just started their Agile HR adventure or their Agile adventures in general. So let's kind of focus a bit on that a bit today, Avril and Chloe. We've also got a few that are in full swing and actually very similar amount that have not yet started. So we can explore that, some hints and tips to help people there. And then we've got a range. We've got a good show of hands for HR. We've got a few learning and development, people and culture, and then we've got some change, agile coaching and consulting, and some other parts of the business as well. So a nice variety, but a strong HR contingent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everybody. That's really informative, and it helps us understand where to focus on as we get into the topic. So today we are talking about Agile adventures in the world of HR, culture, and change. And first and foremost, Agile is a mindset. And I know that Avril and Chloe are going to talk a little bit about this. And there's a big debate, of course, in the Agile world of whether you can start with mindset. Oh, we've got to do mindset first and then build from there. But actually, you've also got to experience Agile. So there's an element of trying tools and techniques and building out on that. So mindset develops over time. And it is ultimately based on values and principles that comes from the manifesto, which is actually 20 years old this year. So there's a 20-year anniversary for the manifesto. And the mindset is all about putting your customer in the heart of what you're doing. And you're looking at how do you start to incrementally, so bit by bit, slice by slice, start to deliver value to that customer. And with the idea that you start to deliver value early and often. And so this brings out all elements of test and learn, the feedback loop, building off what the customer, what works for the customer, what doesn't work from the customer, prioritization. But it also says to get things done, we actually need a multi-skilled self-organizing team. And this is a big thing for HR. How do we actually have all the skills in the team to get the job done and rapidly respond to that customer? Because the more traditional way, the more waterfall way of working is quite a slow response to the disruption and complexity that we now work in. And probably my quote that started last year and is still going, there's nothing like a pandemic to bring out the value of working agile. So I know a lot of you are kind of exploring it based on just the nature of what's happening in the world and responding to that. Okay, so let's move into the counter story, and I'm going to hand over to Avril and Chloe.
Where we started, Natal talked at the beginning about Tracy, and before I joined Kantar, I worked with Tracy at Sky on a project that I was doing with them. And Tracy was starting her Agile adventure there and was beginning to explore. So when I moved from Sky to Kantar, on day one with my new boss, I said, do you do Agile here? And he said, yes, we do. And I went, oh, how exciting, because very few people had got started then. But I quickly learned that what he meant by Agile was hot desking. So there was a bit of a breakdown in communication between where I was and where he was. So we did have hot desking at Kantar when we were all working in the office. And that was what he thought was Agile. However, how we got started really was mainly through one of the business leaders So very shortly after I joined Kantar and discovered they were doing hot desking and not doing any form of agile work, and it is very much a traditional organization, one of the transformation directors who sits on the board of the area that I head up came to me with a problem. And she said, we have a problem. The board want an answer to this problem. And we've had it for about 6 or 7 months and we've done nothing about it. And the problem was they wanted to know, we were going through a transformation journey. And from an HR perspective, they wanted to know, should we buy, borrow, or how do we invest in the new organization from a people perspective? So they were transforming from one way of working to new domain expertise. And they needed to know, the board needed to know, should we hire a whole bunch of new people in our organization, or should we develop the people from within inside the organization? And what would the cost and the implications be of doing those two things? This problem had been sitting with them for about 6 months, and the transformation director came to me and said, but we need an answer very quickly. So I jumped on it and thought, I have an opportunity here to use Agile, because I thought we could answer that question very quickly if we work together across HR and across finance. So I called up Natal and we ran our first sprint, which had never been done before in Kantar. And it involved a cross-section of HR. So we had reward people, we had recruitment people, we had development people, and we had our finance colleagues all in the room at the same time. And we sprinted for a week. We answered the question. HR had never worked like that before. Normally, it would have taken the transformation director to go and individually consult with each of these departments, pull together information, present it to the board. But we brought in Natal, we pulled the team together, we answered the question within 3 weeks, produced the report for the board. They were delighted and went, how did you manage to get to this answer so quickly? And that was the start of our Agile journey, and we've not looked back ever since. We've triggered a lot of good stimulation in the organisation. So that was really my introduction to Agile. But I think, Chloe, you probably have more stories that you'd like to tell of how you were introduced to Agile and how you got working with it.
Well, my introduction was, as I said before, Agile Avril, we call her sometimes. Avril joined Kantar, and she was telling me, and I wasn't involved in that first sprint, but I heard all about it. And I was amazed because I'd been at Kantar a long time and I knew how long it takes, like an oil tanker. I knew how long it takes to change things and to create new thinking. So, or it did at that time. It's not always the same. And so Avril had talked to me a little bit about Agile, and then Natal had organised a meetup. It was an evening meetup, and it was in the days when you actually went face to face and you had a glass of wine while you saw people live. And this was my introduction to, kind of formal introduction to Agile. And I learned, and we had a great experience, and we practiced some of the tools and techniques. So for those of you that started your journey, you might be familiar with using personas, with user stories, with the daily stand-up. And I think they were the 3 things that stuck in my mind at that time. And we can still drink virtually just water at this time of day. But they really stuck in my mind because they were so easy to use. And I went back and literally started the next day doing a daily stand-up with myself on Post-it notes, which might sound strange, but when I say it changed my life, it was about changing my ways of working. So that was my kind of introduction. I started using some of those tools with parts of the business if I was doing workshops with them. And then Natal, with her colleague at the time, Rena, who she wrote the book with, were running a program in Amsterdam, which we organised, a bespoke program for Kantar, an introduction to Agile for HR. And so that was when I had an opportunity to really deep dive and to get understand a little bit more about it, and then was able to go back. My first sprint after that was something that I did with Avril together. And then after that, I kind of went out on my own and I was leading sprint teams.
Although that was our introduction, and we'll talk to you about our proudest moments and where we are now, what that first introduction did for us was it resulted in us building out a learning framework. The question that we answered for the board was, we think that we need to build the expertise in-house. It costs less. We're not going to be able to recruit. And we did that by looking at our French market and building a big proposal for the board. It resulted in our first sprint, answer the question, but very quickly from there, the business hooked onto it, and it resulted in us building a learning framework out to be able to restructure the organization into domains. And as the people entered the different domains, we grew what we called a honeycomb learning framework. And lots of the business leaders helped to build that. So we started doing multiple sprints back to back to try and build that learning framework for the business. So as well as answering the board's question, we quickly moved into a solution that was very useful for the business. So that was 4 years ago, I think. And now I think we should share with you our proudest moments, because where we are now is we've moved quite a journey from there. And I think we've stimulated a lot of great thinking for different divisions. So I think Chloe's going to share a little bit of her two bigger proudest moments, and then I'll share a couple of my proudest moments over the last 4 years.
One of the I think the proudest moments, we say here going virtual and going big, because there was a conference called Heat and Light, which was in Asia, and Avril was asked to be involved in that. And the previous year, I think, Avril, you went over to Singapore and you helped to deliver this conference with 100 or so people in an agile way. Well, this year, when the same thing happened, we couldn't go. It was right at the beginning of the year, and some people were still traveling, but the decision was made that we couldn't go. But we decided to still go ahead with the conference, and we did it virtually. So we had a number of Scrum Masters. I was one of them. So I was actually supporting Scrum Masters on the ground. I was working with somebody in Malaysia. Avril and I turned our day upside down. So we were sleeping during the day and awake during the night so that we could support this group. And we had about 100 people running all these different sprints, working with different countries and different leadership teams, with Scrum Masters all around the world who we were supporting there. So that was one. And then the other one, and I might talk a bit more about it later, was introducing sustainable practice in Kantar. So we wanted to introduce a research offer where we could work with organizations to help them understand how sustainable their businesses were. And it was such an important thing to be involved in. But it was also something where I have really had to flex to what the business wanted, because what you'll probably find as you go through this journey is the business often doesn't want to do what we would consider best practice in terms of agile and in terms of a sprint, which would be a fixed kind of good chunk of time. So I can talk a bit more about that later on. But that sort of moment of pride that you get when you see the work that's produced as a result of the sprint done so quickly, and the focus that people put into it is so rewarding.
And I think, Chloe, I would come back to Heat and Light and just mention, from a business perspective, when I went out to Singapore the year before, and I think this is where Agile comes in really handy. The senior leader had phoned me and said, we run a conference every year, and we get together all the senior leaders into a room, we kind of open their heads, we fill it full with knowledge, and then they go off. Nothing happens. So what we really wanted to do with Heat and Light was to create a conference where people started the journey of something. And she said, I know that you're doing this agile stuff. Do you think you can turn and twist that to make some sort of change for us? So year one, I went physically, as Chloe said, and into each room, we created Kanban boards for each area of the business. Each leader took ownership. We did work in the conference, and what that resulted in is after the conference, that work continued because it didn't all get done at the time. And so they had never experienced, in the year that, or any other conferences that they'd had in the past, they'd never managed to get any sustainable change. And after the first conference, they got a lot of change, which they loved. And that allowed us to do the virtual conference later on. I mean, where we are now in our journey and some of our proudest moments is, we're working with the business with lots of different divisions, our media division, our HR division, our finance division, and we're even working with clients and helping helping our business leaders answer questions that our clients have. So we did a sprint at the beginning of last year actually, with Coca-Cola. We're about to do another one coming up with Amazon Prime. So this is when our clients will come to us and say, we have this problem that we need fixing. And we are traditional researchers. And normally we would go into the bag and go, there's your solution. And that's not working for our clients anymore. Our clients go, oh, it's not quite right. Could we find the answer together? So we are helping to coach our business leaders and creating Scrum Masters across the whole business to work even in an agile way with their clients. So, we've come on quite a journey. Our finance teams are now working in an agile way. HR is beginning to work in an agile way. Some of the divisions, particularly the Insights division, which was the one we started with, they're even hiring Scrum Masters into various parts and pockets of their business area and working in an agile way. Are we at the end of our agile journey? No, we're still on a journey, but seeing the pockets emerge through the enthusiasm and the results that we've achieved is really probably where we see our greatest and proudest moments that have emerged over the years. So it's a journey, and we're proud of it so far.
Thanks, Avril. And I think this kind of idea of quick, slow sums up the journey, because there are some things, as I said, that you can implement immediately. You can go back, you can pick up Natal's book, or you can, we could tell you in 5 minutes how to create personas, how to create a user story, how to create a Kanban board. And you can go and put those in place and in practice tomorrow. The slow part, and you will also get quick results if you do that. The slow part is the mindset. And I think, as Avril said, we're not at the end point. We don't have that across the whole business. We don't have an agile mindset. It does exist in pockets, but we couldn't honestly say that we've introduced agile across all of Kantar, and we now have the agile mindset that Natal talked about at the beginning. And I think some of the things that you need are that idea of managers trusting and letting go. And I was setting up a sprint with a manager. I was briefing him, and I said, you have got to trust the team. And there was a lovely image that I think came from one of Natal's materials as well, of the leader saying, I don't mind how you cross the river. We've got to get across the river. I don't mind if it's a bridge or a boat or a tunnel. And I explained this to this leader, and he said, oh, Chloe, I don't think I can do that. He said, I think I know the solution. And we persuaded him, and he did trust the team, and they did come up with some good solutions. But I thought it was a lovely example that sticks in my mind of how you really, that's what we mean by mindset. It is really letting go. And it's so hard often for managers who feel that they're not then contributing if they're allowing people to come up with their own solutions. It's also, I think the mindset thing is also about creating the space for people to focus on just one thing. And this is something we really struggled with. I kind of alluded to it earlier on, that to really change things and to really produce good work, you need to have a period of time. We ideally say a week, although we've done half a day to 2 weeks. But if you want to sprint on something, you really need people to be focused entirely on that topic. And that, I think, is the hardest thing. People say, oh, yes, we'll do it. But then I can't join until a bit later. And I have got a client call that I have to go to halfway through. So again, for me, it's really encouraging the business to be completely focused. And that's where we're not entirely there. And I think the other question that I have is how you sustain the work that you do in the sprint. So we've created some great solutions in a sprint, but what I see sometimes is that then there is a lack of follow through, and then people revert back to their kind of old ways of doing things and planning and Gantt charts and things that take a long time. So I think there is that's another piece of learning that we still have to do. And then I guess I would leave you with the final thought that Agile doesn't work for everything. And there was a particular piece of work that I did last year. We were creating a guide, performance review guide, and we were approaching it in an agile way, but actually it was a waterfall project. We needed to do it step by step in a traditional project management way. And that was, an example of how we're continually learning, and the recognition that it's agile isn't for everyone and everything all of the time.
Some of you that have read the book or got started on Agile already will probably be very, very familiar with the Agile Onion. I think if we summarize where we've been and where we're going, we are still, what we did to get started was we picked up some of the tools and processes and just got going. I think we are between using those tools and processes more readily in the organization. So we're coming from the heart of the onion to try and create an agile mindset for our organization at the start. It's a very traditional organization. It wouldn't have worked. But we've been experimenting with the tools and processes. And I think it's fair to say that we have good practices going on within the organization. We have increasing numbers of Scrum Masters, increasing numbers of business areas that are wanting to work in an agile way. And as I said, we're working with clients in an agile way. From our own team's perspective, we now fully work in an agile way. Our team is dispersed across the world and we have different hubs and we create our workload and we decide who's the best person to get that done. So we have a Kanban board that we work with all the time. It's a Trello board for us. And so from an HR perspective in our team, we work fully agile. And I think there are good pockets of practice going on in our organization. But we were bought last year and we're still on a journey. Our business leaders are beginning to put together a new business strategy, which might result in a change in culture and values. And we're hoping from some of the groundwork that we've done already, there might be a bit of an upsurge to start to change some of the principles and values we have in Kantar. And maybe we'll get to that full mindset in time, because that does involve a different organizational structure and a different way of working. So we're very much in the tools and practices and processes part, but beginning to dust that in and across the whole organization.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you so much. And what's really interesting about the story is a few things. One is you went after a problem each time, and that's a big kind of message. Is there's no use bringing in agile unless you know the problem you're trying to solve with agile, and it also makes it much more relevant to the business, to the organization, if there's a clear reason why you're embracing a new way of working. So I think that for me really came out. I love that it's also then developed into even working with your end customer, because ultimately agile is about value flowing through the business. What we do for people, for the business, should flow through to the end customer. And working agile, it is a business kind of way of working. And I think this is what starts to bring out. It's not that this is about a HR way of working. This is actually how you work with real customers, not just our internal customer. So I really liked that theme coming out as well. We'll start going into questions. So as we've already got a few coming in, which is fabulous. And so please pop your questions into chat. I've got a couple that we'll just start with, and then we'll go into some of the set questions as well. One is, so at Kantar, a sprint is something in particular, isn't it? Because sprint comes from Scrum, is traditionally more this ongoing flow of work. But at Kantar, when you say we are sprinting, it sort of means a certain kind of approach to it. Could you tell us just a little bit more about that? Maybe Chloe, would you like to explain what a sprint is at Kantar?
So a sprint at Kantar is a time box, a period, and we love the another term I've picked up from Agile is time boxing, which is so cool. But what it means is it's a period of time that you agree to solve a particular problem. And depending on the size of the problem will depend on how much time you need. But typically for a big problem, we would recommend about a week. But as I said, we can do it in a shorter period of time. So a sprint is a period of time in which you agree to get a group of people, usually cross-functional, with no hierarchy, a group of up to about 9 people into a virtual room. It used to be a real room, but it's now a virtual room. And then you work through, there are not very many, but there are a few processes that you can use, and some of the tools I've already mentioned. So in some ways you have some quite sort of strict ways of working, but in other ways, the outcome, what is not strict is the outcome, which is very open. And that's really up to the group of people with the right skills to solve that problem.
Yeah, great. And the reason I wanted to just specify that is that sprinting does come from Scrum, and Scrum, you would essentially sprint back to back over a period of time to deliver a project. But what you guys found was bringing in this sort of more almost hackathon style sprint was a way to really energize the business, get them going, and also accelerate projects. And I actually find that this way of kind of time boxing a topic and people sort of ring fencing people's time as well and resources is great in HR, because we cover so many things. Actually focusing in on one thing for maybe a week really accelerates where you're at. And it's a great way to bring in people from the business for just a set period of time. So it is a really great way of bringing in Agile for our kinds of teams of HR, culture and change. Excellent. We've got a few questions coming in, so I'm just going to pick up on a few more before we go to some of the set questions. And leading on from that, Avril, is how would you describe the role of a Scrum Master, particularly with what you created at Kantar?
So, a Scrum Master is the person that helps the group to make the best of what they can do. So the Scrum Master works between the team that Chloe's talked about, let's say a team of 10, which might be a sprinting team, and coordinates their work, protects them and protects their time, and ensures that the outcome that they produce on that week or however long that you might sprint for is a satisfactory outcome for the product owner. So there's ultimately a product owner that is somebody within the business that wants a solution developed or a question answered. And the Scrum Master is the person that will work between the team and the product owner to ensure that piece of work lands at the right quality for the product owner. It's a great job. I love it. I love when I'm Scrum Master. It's great fun.
It is. And I think it's a really nice, with what you've built at Kantar, it's a great way of people from HR going out and helping build Agile in the organization. And, it's also kind of where the new version of learning and development or HR business partner is going. And I know some Agile coaches will debate that with me online today. But I see a real merging of some of those roles into the Agile coaching role, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to keep going with it. We've got quite a few questions coming through, so I'm going to keep going with some of those. Just quickly, going back to you, Chloe, you said in one of your examples at the end that you saw there was a product that you're working on which was around performance, and you saw that you should work waterfall rather than Agile. And in the past, I've said that, look, we're not saying that waterfall's bad, but the more complex something is, the more, it's a big complex problem, the more dependencies, the longer it goes for, then generally you need an Agile approach to actually solve the problem. But there are some things that you might just need to get done, and you might just sort of tick the box and move it on. And that's where you maybe do still use a more kind of waterfall direct approach. So could you just tell us about how you identified that this thing that you worked on actually suited more a traditional way rather than Agile?
And I think I would agree with your point in general that it's the complexity that would guide you down which route to use. What suggested that we should have used waterfall is that we were doing the opposite of what Agile is supposed to do. We were going over time and over budget. So we were producing a guide about performance review, and what we really needed to do was get one part completely finished, and then we needed to start the next part. So we really needed to take a very clear approach. And what was actually happening is that we were still developing and designing as we were writing the content as the designer was designing, as we were trying to get it translated. And it's just given that we had those separate parts, we really should have taken a more, that more traditional approach. Not to say that you couldn't use Agile tools, and certainly in thinking about upfront the content of what we wanted to put into the document, definitely, in fact, we did use user stories at that point. Definitely you can use a Kanban board, but actually getting the work done, we really needed to be more step by step.
Yeah. And I think this is an interesting point, because in the world of HR and, learning and development, cultural change, sometimes we get a bit worried because there's things of business as usual that we have to just get done, and maybe it's a continuous process, versus there's projects where there's a natural kind of innovation element and you want to do more that test and learn and also co-create and prototype. But all of that can be on your Kanban board and you're still using an agile approach of prioritization, determining value. But some things on the Kanban you just get done, and others you would start to maybe run a sprint on that or really kind of iterate in a more agile way. So I think that's where some of the distinctions can come out, isn't it?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got some more questions. So I'm going to go over to you, Avril. And this is a little bit similar to some of the things I was going to ask you anyway, so we can get starts to get there. So what would be your advice to engage a HR senior stakeholder, and because you want to use an agile toolbox, but they don't really understand the mindset yet?
What a great question, and I think that came from Carla. And I would say quite openly right now, in the journey that we've been on, Chloe and I actually have found, it might not be the same in your organization, but I have found it easier to engage stakeholders in the business in using Agile than I have in influencing my own team in HR. So it's not an easy journey to go on to influence HR. I mean, my advice would be get passionate about it yourself first, because I think senior stakeholders will buy something if they trust you. And so, you know, what we did, and I think we, at the beginning, from my team's perspective, we went gently. We had, you know, people like Chloe, people like myself who were really excited about it, got to know the toolbox, trained ourselves. We're already working with the business on a few of the, you know, on working in an agile way before we tried to influence HR, because my boss was a little bit, I'm not really too sure. And it probably took us about a year in our journey before my HR boss would buy into us working in an agile way. So I think my best advice to you would be become familiar with the toolkit yourself, get to know it. If you get a chance to experiment somewhere, take the opportunity to experiment, particularly if your HR senior stakeholder maybe has a problem that needs fixing and you think you could use some of the agile tools and practices to solve that problem. A bit like our journey. We solved a problem and before you knew it, we were becoming famous for dealing with the issues quite quickly. So I think best advice, get passionate, know it yourself, and then you'll be able to sell it on quite quickly.
Excellent. Great advice. And actually feeding off that, we've got another question that sort of builds up from there, which is, while HR can play an important role in Agile, who is ultimately accountable in your organization, in Kantar, to make this work and keep it going? What's your thoughts around that? Maybe I'll go to Chloe first and then Avril can build on that.
Well, that's a really, really good question. I think that at the moment, I would still say that the accountability, and you might think differently about this, Avril, but I still think the accountability sits with us in the learning team. I think we're seen as the people who have the expertise on Agile. So when it comes to, we're the first port of call when somebody's got something that they either want to solve through Agile, they've got a question about Agile, or they want some support. I think they tend to come to us. But what we're noticing more and more is actually parts of the business are then taking it on themselves. So it's a bit of a, you know, ultimate accountability. I'm not sure that I can really answer that question properly, but certainly there are parts of the business that are saying, okay, we get it now. We've had some practice. We see what you've given us, and we want to take it on. We're growing up and we're going out into the world ourselves, and we take that on ourselves. And we'll come to you for some support and some coaching and some questions, but actually we don't need you.
And I think if I could build on that, Chloe, I think the answer in my head is a great question, and you know, it's a good debate. Is I think the ultimate responsibility sits with each and every individual, because it's a mindset change. It can't have a central ownership to some extent. I think there needs to be, and to Chloe's point, some ownership to get the business going, but quickly hand it off. So we have Workplace in our organization, which is Facebook for our world, and people get together in teams. So we kicked off an Agile Workplace working group to see who would join it. And I kicked this off as a Agile for Kantar, and to see who would join it. And the first comment I got is, oh my goodness, HR have put together an Agile chat room. Isn't it just the IT people that do that? And now we have about 300-400 people in that group, and it's completely owned by other people. So it's not seen as our ownership. And there are lots of people organizing different meetups, different conversations to share the stories of what they're doing. So I think we quite quickly have tried to devolve it down and out into the organization to let them pick it up in their own pace. So yeah, that would be my vote on that.
And is there any, just building off that, because this is one of the questions I was going to ask you, Avril, is there anything specific that you would like to add about how you've taken senior leaders or senior stakeholders along on the journey? So, because what's interesting with Kantar is that this hasn't come from the CEO announcing that you're going agile. Actually come more from bottom up, which is quite interesting, and more from pockets of the business that saw there was a need to change to deliver value to the customer. So just talks a bit about how you've kept senior stakeholders kind of going and kind of got them in and built that curiosity and that buy-in.
I think for all of you that have been on your agile journey or about to embark upon it, I think bringing senior leaders in is a really key issue. And if I go back to the earlier stages of when we were building out the Honeycomb learning framework, so it's a learning framework. We could go together, we could get into a cupboard and build it. But we chose to build that in an agile way so that we could start to ignite the agile way of working. So we had to do 6 different sprints with 6 different leaders in order to build out different elements of the learning framework. One of the senior leaders went, I know what should be in it. I don't need a team of people. What's this user story nonsense? Do I have to take people away for a week? Everybody's really busy. You know. And I said, just come on the journey with me. Just trust me, please, and see how you get on. Because you probably could do it, but are you going to get the same buy-in? Will you know that it's the right thing for your customers? Will you have checked and done all those checks and balances? If we work it through a cross-functional team for a week and a small team, I think we'll likely build a better solution. Not convinced, she came on the journey with me. And by Wednesday, she phoned me up at the end of the sprint day and went, oh my goodness, I was completely wrong. I've never seen a team of people work in such a passionate way. The outcomes already and the things that they're developing are things that we wouldn't have developed unless we'd have got everybody together. Getting input from our customers as we're building and our clients has made this whole product a completely different thing. So I think with seniors, a little bit is just trust me and come on the journey. And usually it's never failed so far. We've had a lot of reluctant leaders at the start of sprinting and a lot of really happy ones at the end. So I think they have to just come with you a wee bit.
I think what I like about the approach as well is that because it's this very targeted sprint on a clear business problem, there's clear results at the end that people can, implement, take away, or, see some data on. And that's what we're trying to do, isn't it? Is demonstrate impact. And I know that the first time we worked together, we had board members were like, oh my God, we just did 6 months of work in 1 week. This is amazing. And because it went around all the committees and the ups and down decisions that are normally there. So it's an interesting way of actually building, I think, buy-in, because people go, oh yeah, I can see results and this works. I think maybe I should take this into my team and start working this way. So we're going to keep going because a lot of the questions coming in again is covering what we wanted to talk about. I'm actually going to jump forward because we've got one that sort of feeds off that a bit more and then come back to some of the others. So we've got a question where Kantar is known as having more of a command and control culture, and it's part of WPP, so it's a pretty massive entity as well. How did you work with people in this culture? How did you get them to accept prototype outputs versus polished presentations that they might be used to? Chloe, would you like to comment on this one?
Yes, gosh, that's really interesting. I think it was a little bit of what Avril said. It was about trust. And so that story I told you before, where I said, you've got to trust the team and they might come up with something different. And he said, I don't know if I can. And Avril was on the call. It was part of the Heat and Light piece of work. And anyway, I said, well, then this isn't for you. If you can't trust the team, then this won't work. And he couldn't really say no, because he was part of this. He was part of this conference, but he was really unsure. And then, but he kind of had no choice. So he had to trust the process. And then he saw that it did work. And he said to me afterwards, he said, actually, I'm amazed at what the team have come up with. So I think there is an element of, although we do have that, we also do have, the people at Kantar are very nice. They do like to help and they like to learn. And so I think we did have that on our side. And I think the other thing that was helping is that we were being pushed by clients. So you've asked us about how did we persuade senior leaders? Well, in a few cases, so Coca-Cola, it was the client. And then there were a few pitches where people have come to us and said, we've got a pitch for this work. They want us to do it in an agile way. Can you tell us what we should say in our pitch? Because we don't know. So I think that the job was a bit easier because we actually had the influence from the clients as well in some of those cases.
Yeah. And I think that's, again, it just shows the power of linking all of this to actual business problems and delivering through to the end customer. And let's not make it about the HR solution as such. Let's make it about what are we trying to solve for the business? How do we make people be better at their job? And how do we deliver through to the customer? And the more we do that in all of our work, I feel that people just, that kind of language resonates, and you don't even need to necessarily use the words agile per se. You can say, right, we're going to use a method to solve this problem and deliver value. And once we talk like that, people start to really buy in. Excellent. I'm going to move on to another question. Avril, just quickly, did you want to add anything on that one?
No, I see it's come from Owen, and we used to work together at William Grant's. Yeah. So yeah, good. And I know that you're practicing as you go. I think that my only build on it is I think a lot of senior leaders are fed up with the polished presentation that sometimes HR will take to them. I mean, I'm only talking from an HR perspective, and go, look at all these lovely things we're going to do. And they kind of go, really, are you really going to do that? So, going with this is the problem that we think you've got. Here's a starting point. We will produce some output at the end of the week that satisfies the need, and we will get started on building solutions to help you. How does that sound? As opposed to, here's this lovely PowerPoint presentation of all these things that are a little bit once upon a time. Because I think we can often overpromise and underdeliver, whereas I think with Agile, we deliver small amounts incrementally, which just starts to take them on the journey. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we're at 10:24. So I am what we're going to do, we've got 3 questions left. I'm going to do a little kind of wrap up, and then we'll finish those questions. I'm going to stay online and make sure they're finished before we finish for the day itself. If you have any extra things to chuck into the mix before we do that, please let us know. So we stuck with the questions that came in from the audience today because it actually was covering things that we wanted to talk about, and it's always great to really cover what you want to focus on. What I want to do is just get Avril and Chloe to just say their little thank you and any particular points they'd like to leave us with today. And then we'll go back to the last 3 questions. Chloe, any particular point that you'd like to leave us with today?
I think the point I'd like to leave you with is just do it. It will be amazing. If you don't know how to do it, you don't know what to do. I mean, you can Google it. You can get Natal's book. It's got some great tips. You can look up Jeff Sutherland has got a great book on Agile as well, or get in contact with me and I can send you some of the tools that we've used. So I think that's what I'd like to leave you with, is just do it. You will love it.
And I put people's LinkedIn information up on the screen here. So please connect with us. We're always love talking Agile HR. I know the three of us do. And Avril, what would you like to leave people with today?
I think my final parting comment is be courageous. We've one of our proudest moments that we didn't share with you is we blew up the 9-box matrix last year, and we won an award from Disruptive HR for doing it, because it was one of those things that HR just keeps doing and the business don't value, and we didn't know why. But business leaders get stuck in the groove and want to keep doing it. So we had to really hold our line and be courageous to stop doing a practice that isn't actually working for the business. So get passionate about it, have fun with it, involve the people that are really interested in it, push on the open doors. There's open doors out there in all your organizations, push on them, and just be courageous to try something new, because it is new. It is new.
Yeah, excellent. And 3-4 years into the journey, and we're still building mastery. So it's a continuous adventure, isn't it? And it's different everywhere you go. So I think let's go back to this context. If you're in Kantar, there was a very specific way of building that energy and then really kind of growing it in the business. You might be in a different organization where actually there's already a lot of Agile happening. And so your way of connecting to it will have a different kind of flavor and a different kind of style. And that's fine. So it's about building a toolbox that's going to suit your culture, your values, your industry. And then, of course, as a HR professional, you can take that where you go and bring value everywhere you work, which is what it's all about. And we are PXO Culture, and it's all about building business success through people success. And hopefully we've started to tap that into that today. Great comment that came through, which is, this is not about a HR solution or a HR thing. This is about business. And the more that we connect what we're doing in Agile to solving business problems, the more success we're going to have. We're just going to go back to the last 3 questions. So the first question is, what are the most clear HR areas and projects that you felt worked best in an Agile way? For example, has your reward team started to work Agile yet at all? Who would like to? Chloe, shall I send that over to you?
Yes. Well, we've used it a lot in learning and development because that's where we work. That's our passion. So great. We wanted to revamp our management development offer to the business, or learning offer to the business, and we used a sprint to do that, and we continue to do that. I've used it quite a bit in ways of working, actually, with the finance team in our own team, and I think that's where it can work quite well in HR. Which sounds Agile often is about a product and developing products, but we have used it quite a bit in that sort of ways of working, where the boundaries are between one group and another group. And that's perhaps quite a nice way in. Reward, Avril, I know you work more closely with the reward team, so you might be able to comment on that. But that's my personal experience.
Yeah, I think we've not done any projects with the reward team since our original journey, but we worked reward recruitment and HR to answer that first business question that we had. But as Chloe says, most of the Agile work that we do in our team now, well, it's fully Agile, is building out the solutions and learning offers for the business. And as Chloe said, management fundamentals was a great one because we got our whole team involved. And it's a management development program that was kind of a bit broken, and our clients didn't really like it very much. And so we were looking at how to move it into a digital context. So yeah, that's probably the best. And we're just working fully Agile, so everything that we're doing in our team is done in an Agile way. Oh, that's the talent learning leadership team. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, particularly with bringing in other parts of HR like reward. Again, it's about solving a problem where you might actually need to cut across several specialisms, and that's a way to get them involved and starting to, because in the end, reward generally relates to performance, it relates to learning benefits, all of that. So.
We did do some work with our talent acquisition team as well, because we wanted to help to increase mobility across the business. And actually, we're still working on that. But again, that was another part of HR where it was a bit of a cross-functional, because we needed to work with our digital HR team, because it was all about how we used our HR information system to encourage people to build up their talent profiles and so on.
Yeah, great. And so just feeding off that, so two more to go. The first one is someone was quite curious that you're borrowing on a range of methodologies here. So there seems like there's lean in operations, there's other kind of elements. So you're using Sprint, but it's slightly different to the Scrum framework in a traditional way. What sort of, any thoughts on this, of kind of, this combination of agile methodologies rather than sort of a one set framework?
I think you're absolutely right. We are pulling down and drawing upon what's right for the business context at the time. And we're experimenting with a whole variety of maybe practices and processes and tools at the moment. From the simple, introducing small retrospective at the end of a team meeting that now seems to be embedded in the organization. 3 questions, let's go. To I'm doing some HR director work at the moment, and we're doing sort of half an hour sessions each day this week to try and solve a problem. So from small things like that to much bigger things that come down from the Scrum framework, we're just playing with the whole plethora, and we're just picking what matters in the moment for the business context that we're in. What can they tolerate? How much time are they prepared to give? What do we think will excite them? And what's the right tool and process to use at the moment? So I think we're experimenting with a whole variety, and I don't think we're fixed on any one thing, and we'll continue to grow as we go.
Yeah, and that's kind of the toolbox, I think, also, is that this Agile starts to look a little bit different maybe in IT than you see, or other parts of the business where it is maybe just one product that you're working on all the time. And you guys are like coaches, really, aren't you? So you're going to pull on whatever works for the situation, which I think is great. Excellent. Okay, so that takes us into the final question, and it's a nice little wrap up. So we'll get both of you to comment on it. I think this was from Aoife. So if you started again, and based on the lessons learnt.
I saw that question pop up and I thought, gosh, I really don't know. Would I do something differently? Because it's been such a fabulous journey. We've had such good success. I guess, like I said, for me, the piece that I don't think we've quite got is that we do these sprints, and they're brilliant for solving a problem, but I think sometimes it does sit on its own. And so I would find a way just to as we started and as we start a new sprint, to think of it not just as a standalone piece, but how we can bring that more globally. In hindsight is a great thing, and maybe it probably wouldn't have been possible, but how we could make it more part of our ways of working rather than this sort of standalone element. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the one danger of this sort of more hackathon style, is that people see it as just that and then go back to what they're doing. What I've thought is interesting is that you as a team have, because that was one thing at the start as well, is you as a team had to move beyond that and actually start to use sustainable agile practices. So I think that's a good thing in itself, that your team demonstrates how to do it consistently. And then it's about breaking that, taking that out to the wider organization. Yeah, great. And Avril, what would you, anything same again?
I've loved the journey. So it's really hard to say what we would have done differently, because I think we've pushed the frontiers, we've pushed the boundaries. We get so excited and happy when we get some breakthroughs in different areas of the business and see some successes. I think we were fortunate that we had a senior stakeholder that had a problem that wasn't fixed, that was prepared to come on a journey. So I think we were very fortunate in the way that we got started. We probably could have accelerated faster, but again, we have to go with the pace of the business around us. So I think if I was looking back, I'd think, couldn't we have done more? But then when I look at the successes as a team, we're working in an agile way across the business. There are pockets. But would I like to be at the mindset point now? Yes. But I think, that sums up our journey. We've been 3 years, and it's a big organization. There's 25,000 people. It's been on a journey where it's had new owners and new owners over the last year, and we've had big restructure. So I think you can only ever go with the pace. I would love to have gone faster and created more of a mindset and more of the culture. Could we get the culture in first? But I just think it takes time.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that realism, because I talk to a lot of people about, you've got to be very conscious of the environment you're operating in, and what's the dial that you're trying to shift. What's the first step? What's the second step? Going from, here over to, for what is it, from zero to hero is just not necessarily going to happen if your culture is got a lot of legacy of working in a more traditional way. And when it's so big, like it is in Kantar, you've got so many different elements at play. But I love it that you also think, oh my God, we've actually really achieved some great things here, and it's been such a great story, and this was worth doing. And we'll do a few things differently, but let's do it again. Fantastic. So thank you so much. I think everyone's been greatly inspired, and are all going out there. I think the one thing to leave with is that Chloe's story at the start of, you can start Agile yourself, go home, have a stand up with yourself, get your personal Kanban board going, and bring in some of these elements to your own working, and then you can go and inspire others. So I think that's a lovely message to finish with. Thank you so much, Avril and Chloe, for joining us today and sharing your story. It was fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for all your questions. We actually just stuck with questions from you rather than our set ones, which was great, and really appreciated your time and your energy as well. So have a great day. We are PXO Culture, and please contact us at any time if you want to talk Agile HR.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye, folks. Bye.